Good morning, everyone. My name is Nathan Harvey. As I mentioned earlier, I will be your facilitator for today's session, which we're about to get started. So thank you so much for joining us for today's hands-on habitat. Okay, so first things first, I hope that you're all in the Slack channel. I'm going to ask you a quick question in the Slack channel, and I would love to see a response there. So let me just type that in really quick. So the question is, can you see the slides okay? And you can just respond by reacting yes. You can give it a thumbs up, whatever you like. Great. So welcome. Today I want to get you some hands-on with this brand new technology, this new open source project that we have called Habitat. Habitat is all about how you can build, manage, and deploy applications. It's really about modern applications for modern application teams. As I mentioned, this is a brand new open source project. And as part of this project, what we're doing is we're actually building a nice Habitat community. And that Habitat community consists of you. And we want to welcome you to the Habitat community. We also want to make sure that the Habitat community is, in fact, a very welcoming place that is inclusive of everyone from any background with any level of technical experience and so forth. We want to welcome you to our community. As such, we do have a published code of conduct, which you'll find right there on the slide. I'm not going to read it to you now, but I do want to make sure that we point that out at the beginning of each and every event that we do around Habitat. So let me talk briefly about our goals for today. Our goals for today are that you join the Habitat community. And congratulations, you've done that. You are now part of the Habitat community. We're really glad that you're here. Next, I really would hope that you have a chance today to build, manage, and deploy an application with Habitat. We're going to have some time with hands-on. Don't worry, you don't have to have much prepared. The only thing that you will need is an SSH client. So if you're running on a Mac or on a Linux environment, you have a terminal or some sort of shell that's available to you immediately. And if you're on a Windows machine, you'll just want to make sure that you have PuTTY installed so that you can follow along with the hands-on labs that we have. Now, I hope that each and every one of you are already in the Slack channel, but if not, I'll give you a second to sign up there. You can sign up at slack.habitat.sh. And again, once you're in there, head on over to the online workshop. Now, I did mention that we are going to give you everything you need in terms of workstation and the technology that you're going to need in order to complete this workshop. So once you're in the Slack channel, I ask that you go over and send a direct message to either of my colleagues, Ian or Uber Geek Girl, and that's Ian or Jessica, and just ask them for an IP address. You can do this by simply, I guess I can show you. You can probably see my Slack channel right now. So if I wanted to, as an example, ask Ian for an IP address, I would click on his name over here on the left-hand side for direct messages. Or if he wasn't already in my list, I would click this button and find Ian there. And I would go right to him and say, hey, Ian. Hey, can I have an IP address, please? And Ian would, I'm sure, be very quick in turning around an IP address. I'm going to move that off of my screen, but look at that. He's dancing for me anyhow, which is pretty fun. All right, so if you could just go and ask Ian or Jessica, that's EEYUN or Uber Geek Girl, for an IP address, then you will be set for the hands-on part. And while that's happening, I'm just going to post that into the chat here in Zoom, which I prefer that you not use. You should do all of your chatting over in Slack, but just in case, I'll put that there so that we have the messages. And let's see, let's make sure that we also remind you in the Slack to ask one of those two fine folks for an IP address. Okay, now, while that is happening, while you're getting your IP address, I am going to talk to you a little bit about Habitat. So let's talk about what is Habitat. So before we actually get to what is Habitat, I just want to back up for a second and ask this question: why do we run infrastructure? What is the point of running infrastructure? Why do we even do that? As it turns out, we run infrastructure to run the applications that run our business. It's important that as we as we think about running our infrastructure, the infrastructure isn't what is actually very interesting. It's the applications that sit on top of that infrastructure that run our business, that help our business succeed. And you know, when you think about it, the infrastructure is kind of nothing without those applications. But it's also true that the applications don't really do a whole lot without infrastructure on which they can run. But the whole idea behind Habitat, and frankly the whole idea behind Chef, is we want to help you ship your idea. We want to make sure that you are serving your customers, building the things that they need, and getting those applications into your customers' hands. Now, as technologists, we have this challenge. There are so many great things that are really easy to get started developing with, and we don't often always think about what are the production implications of running new technologies. There's new technologies springing up left and right all the time. And if you look at this, this is a pretty fun image here. But think about this. How does this impact you? Have you experienced this in your own organization, where a developer hears about a new tool, maybe at a conference, tries it out, has some great success with it early on as they're developing, but then as you continue to develop and move things into production, now things start to get more and more complex and more complicated. And over time, your application is going to spend much more time in a production environment than it is on a developer's workstation. At least we hope so, because that's where all the value exists once we get into production. So we end up oftentimes in our organizations with a big mess of different technologies that can be very difficult to operate. And they all work slightly differently, and that can be a real challenge for us. So I do have a question for you, and I'd love to see some answers over in Slack. What types of applications do you build, deploy, and manage today? Just let us know in the online workshop channel. Are you building Java applications, Rails applications, .NET applications, maybe all of the above? But just give us some answers over there so that that will help us understand a little bit more about you. And I see a bunch of people typing. I'm going to let you type, and I'm just going to keep on talking. What I want to talk about, though, is how painful it can be to run and build applications. Why is it so painful? Well, first, our applications tend to be tied to particular runtime and environments. Think about when you're building out an application, you have to think about at the very early stages of that application, what's the target environment for this application? Where is it going to run? Is it going to run in a data center? Is it going to run in a cloud? And so forth. We have to have different packages for different operating systems. When we think about, I don't know, think about like the Apache web server. You have very different packages. You know, there's one package if it's a Debian-based operating system. There's another package if it's a Red Hat-based operating system. This can be kind of a nightmare. We also have different packages for our applications if they're running on bare metal or virtual machines, in cloud instances, or containers. Think about that Apache. Let's say you want to stand up a generic, just a website. You just want to stand up a web server. The way that you go about standing that up is very different if you're running it on bare metal than it is if you're running it in a container. There are, of course, pros and cons to both of those approaches, but the fact still remains that each one of these is very different and have different packaging needs and concerns. Habitat really is built was designed to build and run modern applications for modern application teams. And so I want to talk about what we mean when we say modern applications, and a little bit about what we talk about when we say modern application teams. And primarily when we talk about modern application teams, what I'm talking about are people that are involved with the building, deploying, and managing of those applications that care about why are we building and managing and deploying those applications. We're doing it in service of our customers. These people that are responsible for those things are usually a group of humans. It's a team of humans. It's not one person. And they're working together, collaborating to deliver that application. But some other things about modern applications. A modern application is immutable. Once we build an artifact, we don't want to change that artifact. We want to build an artifact, be able to test it, validate that it's a good artifact, that it will actually run our application, and then take that same artifact and move it throughout the lifecycle or throughout our environment, whether it's in our development environment, our testing environment, or our production environment. We don't want that artifact to change. Because of course, if we test something, an artifact, if we test it and it works well in our QA environment, and then we have to move it to production, but in order to move it to production, we need to rebuild it, then our tests are kind of invalid. So we want to make sure that the thing that we're building is truly immutable, and we can pick it up and move it into different environments as we go. And it should be fully agnostic to our running environment. Wouldn't it be great if this package, if we could take it and run it on bare metal, or could pick it up and drop it into a container and run that exact same package? And speaking of running applications, where do you run your applications? Let us know in the Slack channel. Do you run your apps on bare metal, in virtual machines, in containers, all of the above? And if you are in a cloud, which cloud are you in? If you are doing virtualization, how are you doing that virtualization? Is it through KVM? Is it through VMware? And those of you that are running containers, how are you managing those containers in your production environment? What sorts of schedulers are you using? Are you using things like Kubernetes? Are you running applications in Marathon with Mesosphere? What's going on there? Let us know. So modern applications, they're immutable. They're agnostic to the running environment. It shouldn't matter. Of course, we want them to reduce complexity. It should be easy. We should reduce the complexity of operating these different applications. And of course, they must enable scaling. So taking a monolithic application and breaking it down into microservices is one way that you potentially can help enable scaling. Let's talk about how we actually go through and build out modern applications. Well, of course, when we talk about modern applications, I think it's important that we all remember, and of course, I'm going to stress that we write application code, we write code, and we put it into a source code repository. A source code repository is where all of our applications, where all of the code that we write begins. Which source code repositories do you use? Do you use Git? Do you use Subversion? What do you use? Let us know there in the channel. And man, I certainly hope that no one here uses the old tried and true version control system anymore. You know that one. It's the BAK version control system. You all know that, right? BAK? Yeah, it's where you take a file and you copy it to filename.bak, and then you modify the file. And then you have this backup of your file. Please tell me you're not using that version control system. No one should be using the BAK version control system anymore. Although, I'm sure many of you have. Of course, you'd never admit that. I certainly have never used the BAK version control system. All right, sorry. Back to our modern applications. We write an application, we put it into our source code repository. We have some process that takes that code and builds it into an artifact. That artifact might be a WAR file if you're building Java applications. It might be an RPM, or it might be a deb file. Whatever it is, you want to take from your source code, run it through some build process, the output of which is an artifact. Now, of course, as we're going through this chain, there are tests that are happening, that are being automated tests that are executing. Perhaps you're running some unit tests on the code before it actually makes it into the source code repository, or immediately thereafter. And by the time you have an artifact, now it's probably time to run some integration tests or some smoke tests and make sure that that artifact actually does what you expect it to do. When you're happy with that, you're ready to take that artifact and publish it into some sort of repository. So we start with source code. It goes through some build process. The output of that build process is an artifact. We take that artifact and we publish it to some repository somewhere. What sort of repositories are you using? Where do you store your application artifacts? Are you storing them in an artifact repository like Nexus maybe, or Artifactory? Do you take them and put them on S3? Do you just write them out to your file system? How do you manage and where do you store those application artifacts? Okay, once we have those application artifacts though, we should then be able to take that artifact and run it wherever we want. And again, it shouldn't matter. I should be able to take this same artifact and run it on bare metal, run it inside a container, run it up in the cloud, or run it on a virtual machine. And Habitat truly enables this modern application workflow. We write some code, it goes into the source code repository. There are some automated tests that happen. There's an automated build process that happens, the output of which is an artifact. We then take that artifact, probably run some additional tests on that, and then publish it out to a repository somewhere. And then our environments, whether it's QA or production or whatever you call it that happens after that artifact leaves the developer's workstation, each one of our environments will pull directly from that repository and run those artifacts or run those applications for us. And so Habitat is a new technology to build, deploy, and manage applications. I will remind you that if you have questions, definitely post them into the Slack. I'm kind of keeping a side eye on the Slack over here, but of course, I also have some colleagues in there that can help answer questions as they pop up. And they can also interrupt me if I need to stop, slow down, or what have you. So there's Jessica waving to you. Yes, great. So Habitat, new technology, build, deploy, manage applications in any environment, from traditional data centers all the way down to containerized microservices. Or all the way up. I don't know which one is up, which one is down. Who knows? It's a crazy world these days. But in Habitat, the application is the unit of automation. So we really think about how do we automate things. Of course, we want to automate as much as we possibly can in our workflows so that we humans can do the things that we humans are best at and let the computers do the things that they're best at. In Habitat, the thing that we're automating, the unit of automation, is the application. So we're going to jump right in. I think I've said enough words. We're probably ready to put our hands on a keyboard and start going with some labs here. So what we're going to do, I'm going to help you. I'm going to walk you through this process. You're going to run your first application in Habitat. And the application that we're going to run is called the National Parks application. It's a Java application that's running in Tomcat, and that Java application sits on top of a Mongo database. So maybe you've never used Tomcat, maybe you've never run a Java application, maybe you've never run MongoDB, maybe you do this every single day. In any case, we're going to do it today with Habitat. When we're done, this is what you'll see. You'll be able to go to your browser, open up your browser and point it at your application, and your application will show you a map of the United States with a droplet for every national park that exists across the country. Okay, so now our first lab begins. In order to participate in these labs, you must be in the Slack channel, and you must be in the online workshop there. From there, I need you to ask Ian or Uber Geek Girl for an IP address so that you can SSH into a workstation that I'm about to give you. Now, I am going to, before I give you the next set of instructions, I'm going to pause for a second. I'm going to post something into the Slack channel. And then I'm also going to post a couple of things that I need you to agree to. So give me 1 second while I make with the typey over there. Okay, the first thing that I'm giving you is a quick reference guide. Now that you have the quick reference guide, I have a couple of things that I need you to agree to. So what I need you to do is I'm posting a message right now in Slack. I need you to either, well, I really need you to just agree to that. If you would, select or click on the thumbs up button. And that agreement says, now that you have the quick reference guide, you agree that you will not use it to try to work ahead of the class. You see, if you take that quick reference guide and move ahead, you're likely to end up in a place, or potentially will end up in a place, that's going to be hard for us to back you out of. And you may end up finding yourself painted into a corner, if you will. So let's just not do that. You have the quick reference guide, and it will help you. However, there's another thing that I just want to kind of check with everyone here really quickly, and that's a question for you. Before joining this class today, did you know how to copy and paste? If you did, go ahead and click the the thumbs up button. If you don't yet know how to copy and paste, go ahead and click the thumbs down. I'm seeing lots of thumbs up on the I already know how to copy and paste. That's good. The reason I mention that is I've given you the quick reference guide. That quick reference guide has every command that we're going to run as part of our lab. But you already know how to copy and paste, so please don't copy and paste the commands. It's much better if you type the commands yourself. That will definitely help you learn more as you go, and it's just the right thing to do. Copying and pasting, not what we're going to do today, except for those 1 or 2 of you that maybe said, I don't know how to copy and paste. All right. Enough with the agreements. I think we've covered all of our legalese. We're good to go. So what I would like you to do is SSH into the workstation that was provided to you. So again, on your local workstation, on your laptop or computer, whatever you're logged into this video chat with, you should have an SSH client. Again, if you're on Mac or Linux box, just use a terminal. If you're on Windows, you'll probably need to fire up PuTTY. And what you're going to do is SSH into your IP address. The username that you're going to use is chef. The password that you're going to use is chef also. And I'm going to do the same, but while I'm doing it, I'm just going to drop one other question here into the Slack channel. I would just like you to let us know once you have successfully logged in to your machine. And while you're doing that, I'm going to hopefully successfully log into my own machine. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to SSH as my user, which is chef, into my IP address, which is not your IP address. It's my IP address. Don't use that one. And then, of course, it asks me to verify the authenticity of my host. I'm assuming that most of us here are pretty technically savvy. So if someone in the Slack could tell me, like, just type in what I need to do in order to verify the authenticity of my host. What should I do here? I always forget the right thing to do. So I'm just going to give you a second to help me out here in Slack. How do you verify the authenticity of a host? Sorry, it might be early in the morning for you and you didn't realize that we were going to have such hard, difficult questions for you to answer this morning. I'm going to wait another second or two, see if we get any answers. I see a bunch of you are logged in, so you must have verified the authenticity of your host. How did you do that? Ian is laughing at me. Oh, skip verification, play with fire. All right, Michael, I think you've got the answer practically correct. You know, I'm as an instructor, as a facilitator, I feel it's important that we make sure that everyone knows exactly how to do these things. And so the answer that I'm really looking for is type the letters Y-E-S and then hit enter. So I'm going to try that. Let's see if that works for me. Y-E-S, enter. Or return. All right, apparently I've verified or validated the authenticity of my host. All right, I'm gonna type in my password. And what's my password? Anyone know my password? I forget what my password was. What's your password? All right, excellent. So I was able to get at least one of you to tell me your password. So just a reminder that social engineering is probably the way that you're going to get hacked next. So Michael, thank you for not telling me your password, and I won't call out the person who did. All right, so I'm now logged in. I think I've kind of vamped long enough that hopefully everyone here has had a chance to log into their machine also. Just a reminder, if you have not yet gotten logged in, or if you're starting to fall behind, just let it be known in the Slack channel. You can reach out directly to either Uber Geek Girl or to Ian, or just let us know in the online workshop room, and we'll make sure that we get you caught up and get you whatever assistance we possibly can. Okay, let me see. It looks like there's maybe a chat over here. Okay, good. Good. So moving right along. All right. Back to what we're doing. Why are we here? We're going to run this national parks application. The first thing that we're going to do with Habitat is start our oh, wait a minute, Habitat. Let's make sure Habitat is installed there. What I'd like you to do on your screen where you're logged in is just type have space -- version. And let's see which version of Habitat you have installed. Hopefully, what you see is that you have Habitat version 0.20.0 / some build number. That build number is probably identical to mine, 2007, April 7th at 21836. It looks like we're doing pretty good. It looks like Frank has the same as mine. And yes, this is a brand new build. This is a release that actually went out last night for Habitat. So we're on the freshest possible thing that we can. All right, so we're going to start the supervisor. So what is this supervisor? So Habitat is actually, there's a bunch of components, and And over the course of the next hour or so, we're going to discover some of those components, and we'll talk about each one as we encounter them. So first thing we're going to discover or run into is the supervisor. So the supervisor is a part of Habitat that is responsible for installing things and for keeping those things running. So when you think about things within Habitat, remember that the application is our unit of automation. So the things it's going to install will be applications. The things that it will keep running will be applications. So in order to start our supervisor, you're going to run this command, sudo hab soup run. I'm going to give you a second to type that in. I'm just going to leave it exactly as it is on the screen. And then in a moment, I'm going to type it in myself, and then we're going to come back and talk about the output that you see. Okay, so I'm logged in as you are. I'm going to run sudo hab soup run. Okay, while that's running there, I'm just going to talk about a couple of things that we've done with these workstations. So these workstations that we've given you are actually pretty terrible workstations. I've done some horrible things to them. So the first thing that I've done to them, as you've already discovered, is I've allowed you to log in via SSH with a username and password. Now, of course, you should never, ever, ever have a machine set up where you allow SSH in with a username and password. You should always use keys. The next thing that you've seen is that I have installed Habitat on these machines for you already. So the latest version of Habitat is installed. And then in running this last command, sudo hab soup run, what you've also discovered is that I have given you passwordless sudo access to the box. So here's another little agreement that we have to make really quickly. I've given you this workstation. It sits off in the cloud somewhere. It's just open on the internet. Please use it for our labs, and use it only for our labs over the next couple of hours or next hour and a half or so. And we'll, if you're good with it, we'll leave it up for another day if you want to keep playing around with it, provided what you're going to do as you play around with it is Habitat-related stuff. Okay, let's just take a look at what has just happened here. Now, I'm going to move back to the slides, which you can just watch with me. You can look at the slides with me, or you can just scroll back in your output, and you'll see basically what I'm about to show you. So the first thing that happened when we ran hab soup run was that the Habitat command line interface recognized that we did not have the supervisor package installed. So the first thing that it told us was that we're missing the package for core hab soup 0.20.0. So it knows it's running 0.20. It knows there's a supervisor at the same version, and it knows that that thing is not yet installed. So it goes and it grabs that and it downloads it from somewhere, and we'll talk about where that comes from in just a minute. It downloads it, and then it installs that hab supervisor. So as it goes through, it downloads all of the packages that are required. It installs it, and you can see here that it had installed the hab soup with 13 new packages were installed, and then it starts up. And so it gives us some things like a Butterfly member ID, that Butterfly has started, and the HTTP gateway has started. We'll come back to those things in a few minutes. Let's look at what happens next. So now that we have our supervisor running, our supervisor, remember, is responsible for installing things and running things. So what do we want our supervisor to run? Remember, our National Parks application is a Java app that sits on top of a Mongo database. So let's go ahead and get our Mongo database up and running now. So what I'd like you to do is launch a second terminal window. I want you to have your supervisor running in one window, and I want you to SSH into your machine in another window back into that same workstation. I'm going to do the same on mine. In fact, on my terminal, I have two panes here, if you will. So right now I'm logged in at the top pane, and I have this lower pane down here at the bottom. I'm actually going to switch the location of those two. So that was kind of magical if you didn't notice, but what I just did was kind of flop the two. So down at the bottom of my screen where it says installed core hab soup, that's the supervisor that's running. So at the top of my screen, I'm just going to SSH in. This is as if I had another window I'm just splitting my window in two so that it's easy for you and for me to see it. So I'm going to SSH back into that machine, SSH chef at my IP address. And again, it's my IP address, not your IP address. And now I have two windows. One at the top where I'm not doing anything yet. Hello, just typing the word hello. And then at the bottom of my screen, you have the Hab supervisor running. So in that second terminal window, what I want you to do is run this command: sudo hab sup load learn / mongodb. And I'm going to give you a second. Again, I'm going to leave this slide on the screen. I'm going to give you a minute to type that. And then I'm going to switch over to my terminal. I'm going to type the same thing. And then we'll talk through the output that we see. And while I'm doing that, I'm just going to have a quick glance at the Slack to see if there's anything that I need to address or that I can help with. Looks like things are moving along pretty okay over in the world of Slack, which is great. I hope that's going well for you. And I'm going to go ahead and load up my MongoDB. So I'm not going to say hello. Instead, I'm going to say sudo hab sup load learn MongoDB. Now, when I do this, you can watch the output. You've probably already seen it in one of your two windows. But if you watch the output on the lower portion of my screen, we'll see what happens. After a second or so, it's going to go through and see that MongoDB is not found. So it needs to go out and download and install the MongoDB service. And then it's going to launch that. And the end of launching that, you're going to see this, these last three lines here. So first, MongoDB.default is initializing. MongoDB.default starting process as user hab and group hab. And then just a quick note, no pre-alloc may hurt performance in many applications. Now, if you've never run MongoDB, I want to spend the next 20 minutes or so talking about what this no pre-alloc means and how it might hurt the performance of your MongoDB. Actually, that's a lie. I'm not going to spend any time at all talking about what no pre-alloc means and how it might hurt the performance of your application. What I am going to do, though, is remind you that this is a lab. We're doing some learning. We're not here to learn how Mongo works. We are here to learn how Habitat works and how Habitat allows you to launch applications. So if you want to dig into that no pre-alloc and dig into the innards of MongoDB, we can totally do that, but not today, not during this session. OK, so MongoDB is running. Let's just go. You can scroll back through the output, or you can watch on my slides. I've sort of condensed it down for you. So we saw the same thing happening as when we started or when we ran our supervisor. First, the learn MongoDB was not found. That package was not found. So it went out to install it. And it tells us here it's going to this willem.habitat.sh. We'll look at that in just a minute. It downloads the package that we need, including all of its dependencies. And at the end, well, it was the only package it needed. It was installed with one new package. So it completed that installation. It then started up our MongoDB. So we see that service coming up. We also saw, you probably saw, although we didn't see it on my screen, that it updated a couple of configuration files, the mongod.conf and the mongos.conf. Again, not a Mongo course, not a Mongo workshop, so we won't talk about the specifics of those. But I do want to ask this question: where are these packages coming from? Well, as we talked about with modern applications, we write code, we put it into source code, we run some build process, it creates an artifact. That artifact then gets published to some sort of repository. So these artifacts, these Habitat packages that we're running, are stored in the Habitat depot. It's a central location where all of the Habitat packages exist. Today, that's a publicly hosted depot. So we can check it out. Actually, if you go in your browser to habitat.sh, that's, of course, the website where Habitat exists. If you click on this login here, you can sign in with GitHub. Although you needn't sign in, I have GitHub already running and logged in, so now I'm signed in. But if you had gone just without logging in, you can go directly to app.habitat.sh, and you'll see here there are a list of packages. So one of the things that we can do, you see that this took us to app.habitat.sh packages for core. The packages that we're using, though, are from learn. So if I change my URL to learn, or if I, and then I can click on this search packages here. Let's see. Or maybe that's not exactly what I want to do. So I'm going to search for MongoDB. And if I scroll through here, I'm going to see, hey, here's Learn MongoDB. That's the package that we just downloaded. And then from here, I can click on this Learn link, and I can actually see all of the packages that are available for Learn. So let me just talk about that for a quick second. So first, we see over here on the left-hand side that there, within Habitat, there are a thing called packages, and there are a thing called origins. Origins you can think of as your organization or sort of your namespace. Each package belongs to one origin. And the package name, the full package name, is really the origin, the name of the package, the version of the package, and then the build number. Now, when we ask the supervisor to load Learn MongoDB, what we were really saying is go out to app.habitat.sh, find the latest MongoDB package that's available in the Learn organization. Now, alternatively, if there were multiple versions of the MongoDB package available, either multiple versions or multiple builds, when we said load in that package, we could have said load learn/MongoDB/3.2.10. So we could have loaded in a specific version all the way down to a build number. And so the supervisor downloads and installs that and then starts up that application for us. So we now have MongoDB running, and it got that from the depot. But now I have a question, like, and this is a question that I think we all run into often. As it comes time to organize or to operate our applications, maybe a developer has handed you an application and said, hey, we need to get this application running in production. Or maybe you're the developer and you've handed it off to someone in operations. So my question to you is, how do you know what configuration options are available for that application? Do you go and ask the developer? Maybe the developer tells you it's been documented on the wiki, so you should just go read the wiki. Or maybe a developer is responsible for writing a runbook that talks about those configuration parameters. Of these, which things do you typically do? Do you ask the developer, read the wiki, look at the README, read the code? And not only which one do you do, but which one of these things do you trust? Do you trust that the developer remembers everything and has told you all the right things? I think at the end of the day, the only way to know for certain what's available in your applications is, yeah, a mix of docs, research, talking. Yeah, talking to one another, also helpful. That's a very astute observation there, Michael. Talking to one another definitely helps. But with Habitat, we recognize that this can be a challenge. And we want to make sure that when you're operating your applications, you have all of the necessary detail, all of the data that you need. So Habitat actually has a way to tell us for a package what the tunables are or what configuration options are available. So in the window that is not the running supervisor, but in your other window, I'd like you to go ahead and run this command, sudo hab sup config learn/MongoDB. And what you'll see here is that this outputs a big, well, it outputs a lot of stuff, but the stuff that it puts out are all of the tunables, all of the configuration options that are available for MongoDB. So I'm going to go ahead and do that as well so that you can see how can I configure this package. So sudo hab sup hab supervisor config, tell me the config of this package, learn MongoDB. And it spits out all of these different options that we can change. So as an example, I could change the Mongo S system log component write. Its verbosity right now is set to 0. I could modify that verbosity verbosity if I wanted to. Maybe there's a reason within my application, within my organization, why I might want to change that. Now, we actually are going to change some of the configuration of MongoDB. Now, the interesting thing here is I talked at the top about we want immutable artifacts. So we're not actually going to change this artifact, but we are going to have a way to change the configuration of that artifact so that we can take that same artifact and run it wherever we want, but we still have the capability, the flexibility, if you will, to adjust a number of different configuration settings. So in order to adjust some of our MongoDB configuration settings, I'm actually going to do this. I'm going to run that hab soup config command again, but this time I'm going to redirect the output to a file called mongodb.toml. T-O-M-L. And I think that's what I want to do. Let me just double check. Yes, that is indeed. So I'm going to hit enter, and it looks like it did nothing. But of course, you'll see that there is now a mongodb.toml file there. Now, you may notice, as I did, when I listed the contents of this directory, that there's also a new mongodb config.toml. Well, let me just talk about what that file is and what we're going to do. We want to change the configuration of our MongoDB. So you have two options right now. You can open up that mongodb.toml in a text editor. The text editors that are available on that workstation right now include Vim, Nano, and Emacs. If you're uncomfortable with any of those three text editors, you can simply take the new configuration file that's available. So I want to do a couple of things here. You can watch along with me, and I'll show you exactly what we're going to change. I'll put that slide right back up. But first, if I just diff MongoDB and the new MongoDB config.toml, you'll see that there are two changes between those two. The existing MongoDB, our current configuration of MongoDB, is binding to the local IP address, 127.0.0.1. It also has a cluster auth mode set up for key file. We want to change both of those settings. So you have two options. You can modify the mongodb.toml, which is what I'm going to do, or you can just copy the new MongoDB config toml and copy it or rename it to mongodb.toml. I'm going to ask Jessica or Ian to type in the command that you would type to copy that, if they haven't already. And I'm just going to edit the file and show you exactly what we're going to edit. So I'm going to vim mongodb.toml. In here on line 2, you'll see the bind IP is set up. I'm going to change that from 127.0.0.1 to 0.0.0.0, like so. The next change I'm going to make, there's a setting in here called mongod.security, or a stanza in here, if you will, called mongod.security. And you'll see that the cluster auth mode is currently set to key file. I'm just going to remove the word key file so that my cluster auth mode is just an empty string. I'm going to write and quit that file. I'm going to then just run another diff comparing the two files, the mongodb.toml to the new mongodb.toml. You'll see that those two files are identical. I'm also just going to drop back to this slide to make sure that everyone has a chance to edit that file. So to edit that file, what we're going to do is change the bind IP address and change the cluster auth mode. So I'm going to ask in the Slack, is your mongodb.toml updated? And you can just react with a +1 or just click on the thumbs up when it is. And I'm just going to give a second because we need to make sure that everyone has this updated so that the next part of our lab works. All right, so hopefully by now you've had a chance to get your mongodb.toml updated. The bind IP address is set to 0.0.0.0, and the cluster auth mode in the mongod.security stanza is set to an empty string. And I've pasted into the Slack channel a command that you can do if you're I shouldn't say if you're uncomfortable with an interactive text editor. I should say maybe if you're lazy, you can just copy the new file over the existing file. Okay, but before we go any further, I have to stop here and ask that you please, like the thing that we're about to do is terrible. You should never, ever, ever, ever do this. What we are about to do essentially is disable some of the security settings and some of the security configuration that is currently on our Mongo database. In fact, what we're doing is we are opening up this MongoDB to the world. We're having it listen on all available IP addresses for this host, and we're turning off authentication into the database. So if this were a real production environment and the port that Mongo listens to was open on the wide world internet, like if it was open up, anyone in the world could own our data, could destroy our MongoDB. Please never, ever, ever do this, except today because it's a lab and we're just trying to learn about Habitat. We're not learning about MongoDB. Right. So our supervisor has another job. In addition to installing and running things, our supervisor also has the ability to now manipulate the configuration of an application. And it can manipulate it at a number of different stages during its life cycle. We're going to do it right now. We're going to kind of do it live. We're going to have the supervisor inject new configuration into our running application. And we're going to do so by running this command. Now, I'm actually not going to leave this up on this slide. I'm going to go and type this command so that I can talk about what this command does. And because if I type and talk, I will type nice and slow. And that should give you maybe enough time, although I'll make sure that you have plenty of time to get this command typed in. So the command that we're going to type here is sudo hab config apply. So we're going to apply a new configuration. And the next thing we need to do when we apply that new configuration is we need to tell it to which supervisor am I going to apply this configuration to. So I need to point at up here. Now, in this particular case, our supervisor is running on the same machine that we're applying this configuration from, but that doesn't have to be the case. You could run this from any machine that has Habitat installed and has access to that one of the running supervisors. But we definitely have to specify up here, so I'm going to just specify the local host, 127.0.0.1. So that's the first thing. Next, I have to tell it where am I applying this configuration. Now, when our supervisors are running services, and MongoDB is a service in the parlance of Habitat, those services get organized into a service group. And we can see the name of my service group down here on the bottom portion of my screen. The name of my service group is mongodb.default. So I'm going to apply this configuration to the mongodb.default service group. The next thing that I'm going to type is a number, an integer. And this number is really which version of my configuration is this, or which sort of instance of my configuration is this. And this is important because when your application comes up, it's running with some default configuration. Anytime you want to change the configuration, the Habitat supervisor will enforce that you're applying a later configuration, so a higher number than, in this case, we came up with default, so it must be a number higher than 0. I'm going to use the number 1. So apply a new configuration. This will be version 1 of the configuration. And then the last thing that we need to type is what configuration are we going to apply? Well, our new configuration is stored in mongodb.toml. So this is the command that I'm going to run. I'm going to just talk through it while you continue to type it. I want to make sure that everyone has this typed in and has it typed in properly. It's sudo hab Oh, and yeah, that's right. Hab config apply dash dash peer space 127.0.0.1. So where's the peer? Where's another supervisor? Which service group? MongoDB.default. Which version of the configuration? It's the first version or the next version. And then what is the new configuration? It's MongoDB.toml. Now, hopefully you've had a chance to type all of this in. I am now going to hit the magic key. The magic key, of course, is return or enter. And so there's a couple of things that just happened here. First, if we scroll back in this, we'll see that it was missing a package. So it was missing the Hab butterfly package. So Habitat went out again to our application depot to app.habitat.sh. It grabbed the Hab butterfly package. It downloaded and installed that. And of course, it had a bunch of dependent packages that were already installed. So it used those. And so now it's been completely installed with one new package. It then went to apply the MongoDB.default incarnation 1. This is the new configuration, the first incarnation of this configuration, to the MongoDB default service group. So it creates a service configuration. It verified that the configuration that we passed to it, that MongoDB.toml, was valid toml. And then it applied it to the peer. So it sent that configuration off to the peer. The peer came back and said, hey, that configuration has been applied. And in my lower window, down below, where I see the Hab soup running, the Hab supervisor running, I can actually scroll back here, and you can see that this is where, right here, the application was running. And what happened was it updated my MongoD.conf. It stopped the application and let it do a graceful termination, and then it restarted the application. Now, you might ask, wow, that feels a little harsh, like you updated the configuration and it shut down the database and then restarted the database. Is there a way that you could do that that's a little bit cleaner, maybe just load up that new configuration? And the answer there is it really depends. It depends on the application. What sort of reconfiguration options does the individual application allow for? In this case, MongoDB is just set up to use the default reconfigure steps, which are basically to apply the configuration, shut down the running app or the running service, and restart the running service with that new configuration. Okay, but now we have MongoDB running on our machine, running under the Hab supervisor. It's running in basically a fully open mode. It's listening on all IP addresses, and it's not doing any sort of cluster authentication. So again, just looking back at that sudo hab config apply command, the peer was the host or IP address of another running supervisor or of any running supervisor. We had the MongoDB.default, that's our service group. The number 1 was the incarnation of this configuration. If we applied another incarnation of that configuration, we would have to increment that number. It would have to be a number greater than 1. And then finally, the file with the new configuration, the MongoDB.toml. Now, one of the things that's true or interesting about the supervisor is the supervisor actually provides a RESTful API. This RESTful API is great when it comes time to managing your running applications. You can use this RESTful API to do things like inspect a running service, figure out what the configuration parameters are, and so forth for your application. So what I'd like you to do, let's see, Michael, you asked, sorry, does the incarnation have to be an integer? I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to say yes with almost entirely certainty, almost entirely certain that it has to be an integer. But I'm sure Ian can double check that for me and tell me that I'm right or not. Yeah, there we go. Thanks, Ian. Totally has to be an integer. There was no hesitation in my voice ever. I don't know why you would question that. Anyhow, so our supervisor provides a RESTful API. In your browser, if you go to your IP address, well, let me just do it. You can watch along with me, and you can do it in your own browser. So I am going to go grab my IP address really quickly. I'm going to open up a new tab. I'm going to go to http:// my IP address, and then I'm going to go to the port that my supervisor is listening on, which is 9631, and I'm going to go to /services. Here I can see a lovely, lovely output. Isn't this beautiful? We've put a lot of design work into this. Obviously, that's a joke. Here's some nice JSON output that tells me here are the running services. This supervisor is running some number of services. As it turns out, right now our supervisor is running one service. It's running a MongoDB service. But the other thing I can do, I can get a little bit more detail here. If I go to services / let me look at the MongoDB service. And within the MongoDB service, I want to look at the default service group. Remember that MongoDB.default? We're going to use that here as our path. And then I want to look at the config, or the configuration of my MongoDB application. So when I go here to my IP address at port or :9631 /services /MongoDB /default /config. Now I'll paste my URL into the Slack. You can look at my running configuration, but remember, you should replace that IP address with your own IP address. Now here's what we can see. We can see right here in the browser the actual configuration that Mongo is now running under. We can see that, in fact, our new configuration has been applied. MongoD is now binding to 0.0.0.0. If we scroll down a little bit further, we'll see some other things here, like our MongoD security. The cluster auth mode is set to an empty string. Now, of course, as Ian points out, we need to use the public IP address, so it has to be the IP address that you SSH'd into, which also should probably raise a red flag for you. I want you to think about what we're doing right now. We just went across the open internet and are now inspecting the configuration of a running service in my production environment. You obviously don't want these ports open to the web, certainly without some sort of authentication at a minimum. But likely this is going to be something that you would only be using internally. You would not have it open to the world. However, there's a lot of great information here that might play into some of the monitoring that you're doing for your application and so forth. There's, if you scroll through this page, you'll see there's a lot of stuff here. I'm not going to go through, and it's more than just the config. I'm not going to go through all of this configuration here right now. Or sorry, it's more than just the MongoDB config. But at the end, if we have time, we can come back and revisit this. So we're in a state now where you have MongoDB running. You have applied a new configuration to your MongoDB. You've basically opened up your MongoDB to the world. You've injected that new configuration. We're now ready to launch our Java application. Now, when we launch our Java application, when we launch that national parks, again, we have a static artifact, an artifact that was built for our application. This application, this national parks application, is a Java app that runs inside of Tomcat. Now, it sits on top of a MongoDB. So this Java application needs to know, where is that MongoDB? It's not configured directly within the application itself. We have to have some way of doing service discovery. So the supervisors actually allow us, or the supervisor itself actually allows us to do some binding to across service groups so that we can do service discovery. So the supervisor has that built directly in. So we're going to run this command. I'm going to move over again back to my terminal window. I'm going to type it. I'll talk about what we're doing. And what I want you to do before you hit enter, before you hit the magic key, is to make sure that you've typed in the command in exactly the right way. Now, I should also remind you that when I say you should type in the command exactly the right way, what I mean is just that. What I can't guarantee is that I will type it in the right way. So if I have a typo, I hope someone will stop me. But if not, you can just wait and laugh at me. But this is the perfect example of please do as I mean to, not necessarily as I say or do. But in any case, here's the command that I'm going to type. Sudo hab load. So I'm going to load another service into my supervisor. What's the name of the service? The name of the service is learn / so learn is my organization or my origin from the depot. And then the name of my package is national parks. And then I need to do some service discovery here. My national parks needs to somehow discover where is my MongoDB. And the way that we set up that service discovery and allow the configuration to happen properly is through a binding. So I'm going to say bind, -- bind. And the way that this national parks application is built, it knows that it's going to bind to a database, and it knows that it will identify that database through the word database, or through a variable name called database. So I'm going to tell it bind the database, and I want to bind this database to a running service group. The running service group is where my MongoDB is running. So my database :MongoDB .default. Okay, so this is the command that you're going to run. You'll see, maybe you can see me, my hands are not on the keyboard. I'm not going to hit the enter or return key just yet, because I'm going to triple check that I've typed this command properly. It'll also give you time to make sure that you have it typed properly. So it's sudo have, oh, see, I definitely have it not typed properly. I hope I didn't break for you. Have soup. So sudo have soup load. So let's load into the supervisor, learn /national parks, the learn origin, the national parks application. I want to bind my national parks application to a database. The database I'm going to bind to is mongodb.default. Okay, so I'm going to read what I have, and I'm going to compare. Let me move my screens around a little bit so that I can see them both at the same time to make sure I have everything exactly as I should. Okay, so sudo have soup learn /national parks -- bind database :mongodb.default. Okay, I'm feeling like it's pretty good, and I'm feeling pretty adventurous, and I am going to go ahead and now hit the magic key. I'm going to press return and pray for the best. Okay, I hit return, and now in the bottom portion of my screen, we see some magic is happening. So what's going on there? Well, it's no different than what we've already seen a couple of times. First thing that happened was the HAB supervisor said, oh, you want me to run learn national parks. Well, I don't have that installed. So I'm going to go out to the depot and grab learn national parks and all of its dependencies. Now, I've already told you that national parks is a Java app that runs inside of Tomcat. And you can see that it's doing things like downloading, it's downloading a JDK, it's downloading Tomcat. We know that it's connecting to a Mongo database, so it downloaded a Mongo tools package. That Mongo tools package is going to do some things. And so now it's going through and installing each one of those things. And then the next thing it's going to do is start up my start up my Java application. Now, when it starts up this application, it's going to do two things. The first thing that it does is it initializes the application. And in the initialization process, what happens with the Java application is it actually has data that needs to be loaded into the MongoDB. So during the initialization phase, it's going to take the data. That data is all of the national park data, and put it into the MongoDB. It then will run my Java application. So it will start up Tomcat, start up my application connected to my MongoDB. At the end, you should see something like Catalina start, server startup in some number of milliseconds. Now, if all of that worked well, here's what we're going to see. If you go out to your IP address at port 8080 /national-parks, you should see you're running national parks application. So I'm going to just launch a new tab over here in my browser. I'm going to go to port 8080, and I'm going to go to /national-parks and hit enter. And here's what I have. I have my map, and it looks like there they are. There are my droplets. So I now have my map with all of the data of the national parks. So here's my question to you. Is your app working? And you can just click on the +1, or you can click on the -1. The thumbs up or the thumbs down, let us know. How's it going for you? Thanks, Bill. It is a pretty awesome app. One day I'll introduce you to the person that wrote it for us. All right, it looks like we have a lot of working applications, so yay, that makes me very happy. Congratulations, you are now running maybe your first application with Habitat. Let's just go through a couple of other things, sort of review what we've seen, and maybe check out a couple of other things here. So remember, our supervisor provides that RESTful API. So in addition to looking at the MongoDB config, we could also open up another tab, and at 9631, our our supervisor's REST interface, or HTTP interface, we'll go to services/national-parks, and we can see the default config there. And sure enough, we see that it's binding. It has a database. The database is listening on port 27017. That's the port that Mongo listens on by default. We can see that the database has an IP address, and you'll notice that this is the local IP address for your machine and so forth. So you can see all of the configuration for your national parks application right there. Yes, other things that you can find through the API, at least when they're configured properly, we saw the configuration. Within your package or within your service itself, you can bundle up a health check, which is really nice. And you can go and check out the docs for more about the different endpoints that you can access through that RESTful API, and then also learn about what sort of things might you package into your own application. So what we've done in the last hour or so is we've introduced you to a bunch of different Habitat concepts. First, we saw the hab command. So Habitat is itself a framework for helping you build, deploy, and manage applications. Part of that framework includes the hab CLI, or the hab command line interface. We saw that the hab CLI is pretty powerful. It can do a bunch of stuff for us. It can interact with the supervisor to get applications running. We can use it to inject configuration, to figure out the configuration or the configuration variables, the tunables, if you will, for an application, and so forth. We saw the supervisor at work. So we load the Habitat supervisor, we run the Habitat supervisor, and it's responsible for installing, it's responsible for keeping our services running, and it's responsible for configuring our services. So we ran the supervisor, and then we loaded services into the supervisor. We did a hab sup load MongoDB, well, learn/MongoDB, of course, and we also did a hab sup load learn national-parks. We also talked to the supervisor through its RESTful API or through its RESTful HTTP interface, and we were able to do things like read the configuration. And then we also were able to take configuration through our MongoDB TOML and inject it into the supervisors, or have the supervisors inject that into our running application. We also saw how service discovery works. We told our Java application to bind to the MongoDB.default. Now, if you think about how a service group might work in a scenario that's more real to life, right, outside of just a learning lab, if you're running a database, you probably don't want just a single instance of a database. In fact, if you're running a database, you probably want them set up replicating with one another. So in the world of MongoDB, we would definitely want to run with a replica set. That replica set for a database would include 3 nodes at a minimum that are storing the data, that are coordinating with one another. Now, our Habitat supervisor, actually, when it loads a new application or it loads a new service, one of the opportunities or options that we have is to give it a topology, or tell it how to run these particular services. So we could have set up our MongoDB to run in what's called a leader-follower topology, or a leader topology. If we had done that, what would happen when we loaded our first MongoDB is the supervisor would have waited for a quorum of at least 3 instances of MongoDB. So it would wait for 2 other services to start running. Once you had a quorum of 3 MongoDBs, the supervisor would manage a leader election. the leader that would be selected would become the leader within that service group. And then you would have replica sets or followers of that leader within that service group. Now, when I do the binding, I'm telling my Java application not to bind to an individual MongoDB, but to bind to the entire service group. And this way, if during the course of operating my system, one of those three nodes, maybe my leader node, fails and goes away, the supervisor will manage another election for me, and my application will, because it's bound to the service group, will pick up that new leader and will write data or read data from the appropriate locations. So we saw the hab command, we saw the supervisor in action, we saw the Habitat depot at app.habitat.sh, where you can go and both publish your own packages, but also download and use packages that have been published. We saw service discovery, and we saw application configuration, injecting that application configuration right into our running MongoDB. When we're using Habitat, the thing that we get are truly operable applications. So these applications are fully isolated. We haven't spent a whole lot of time, and by a whole lot of time, I mean we haven't spent any time looking at where did these applications actually get installed on disk, but I'll kind of leave that to you to sort out and figure out through the docs, or towards the end we can take a look at that. Our applications are immutable. The application themselves, the artifact that we built, is the same. We have the flexibility to configure that, that running system or that immutable artifact, but we don't need to recompile the application. We don't need to rebuild that package. It's all there, and that package doesn't change. We have a common interface for monitoring health. So we saw the config API, or the RESTful HTTP config service that we could pull up and understand what's happening. What is the configuration of our application? We saw that there are other endpoints like a health check that you can have. Now those health checks, those get built into the package themselves. So this is a really nice thing. When we think about our modern application teams, it truly is a team. It's a team of people that is required to run a modern application. You have developers that are responsible for building that application. The developers are the people most likely to know what a healthy application looks like. And so they can build that health check directly into the package that is the application. And then on the operations side, we have a common way of figuring out, is this application healthy? Is this instance healthy? Of course, we can always rebuild these packages from source. We have a common packaging, and we have runtime independence. Now, one of the things that's really cool is that the way that we run and configure and manage a MongoDB is the exact same way that we run and manage and configure a Java application. And in fact, that goes on and on. It doesn't matter if it's a Rails application, a Node application, a Java app, a PHP or Python app. When you package those applications in Habitat, you have this common way of running and managing those applications. So it makes things much more easy to reason about on the operations side and much more easy to manage. So we do truly have these operable applications. Of course, one of the great things about Habitat is that it is all open source. Everything that we've looked at today is completely open source. It's all available on GitHub. It's all available under an Apache license. And as I mentioned at the top of the hour, one of the big things, one of the reasons or goals that I have for today is to welcome you to the Habitat community and have you be part of our community. We'd love to see you using Habitat, playing around with it, and also contributing back to Habitat. So we're really glad that you're here. We truly are building a community, and we want to build this community together. So on the habitat.sh, on the /community page, or on the community page itself, you'll find a couple of links. First, there's the link to Slack. You've already joined us in Slack, so thank you for doing that. You'll also find links over to our forums, our discussion forums, links to blog posts, as well as events that we'll be hosting. We've been traveling the world, coming to a bunch of cities, running a workshop just like this one. And of course, we're also doing online events as we're doing right now. So you can find out information there. Now, before we sort of wrap up and maybe look at a couple of other things, one of the things that we should probably do is make sure that we clean up after ourselves. So we put some services into the supervisor. We loaded some services into the supervisor. if you're ready to, let's go ahead and unload or turn off those applications. I'm just going to go ahead and do that. And then I have like 3 more slides before we'll sort of open it up for hacking or whatever else we'd like to do. Okay, so I'm back here in my terminal. I currently have my National Parks application in the supervisor. I have my MongoDB in the supervisor. I just want to cleanly shut everything down. It's nice to know how to run things. It's also nice to know how to shut them down cleanly. So I'm going to sudo hab soup unload learn national -parks. So I'm going to take that application out. And when I do so, you can see in the bottom portion that the National Parks has had a graceful termination. The service is exited. And then I'm going to do the same thing, sudo hab soup unload learn MongoDB. And now that's running. And now if I come back to my browser, my supervisor is still running. But if I go to the services endpoint, well, those services look like they're still there, maybe. But the application should not be running. In fact, it is not running. It is no longer running at all. The site cannot be reached. So everything has been cleanly shut down. And at the bottom, in the bottom window, I'm just going to Control-C. Habitat thanks you. It is now shutting down. Okay, so I've shut down everything. I've unloaded all of the things. Before I sort of open up our time, maybe to let you go, maybe to answer some questions that you have, or to help you with some hacking or maybe some additional demos, I do want to just give a quick shout out for ChefConf. ChefConf is coming up in May in Austin, and we would love nothing more than to see you there. There are going to be a bunch of Habitat talks at ChefConf. And in fact, there's going to be a whole Habitat zone where we'll be doing demos, doing some training, letting you get some hands-on, and just hearing more of your feedback about Habitat. We also have training sessions that are happening throughout, on the first day of ChefConf, and we're also offering free chef certification exams during ChefConf. So I'd really, like I said, I'd love to see you there. It's May 22nd through the 25th in Austin. The first day is workshops and training. Days 2 and 3 are keynotes and technical sessions. The Habitat zone is open all afternoon on days 2 and 3. And then day 4, we have a sort of a wide open hack day. Welcome to do whatever you like. Also, we're running a new special. If you buy 4 passes, you get 1 for free. So ChefConf is best with your team of modern application developers and modern application team. It's more than just developers, it's also the operators, of course. So bring the whole team to ChefConf. We'll have some fun together. Okay, that is the entirety of the sort of prepared content that I have. We do still have about 40 minutes if you'd like to hang out. And we can answer any questions that you have. We can also help you if you want to do some of your own hacking and just sort of exploration of Habitat. And to that end, we have a couple of different things that we would suggest as good sort of next steps with Habitat. First, you can continue to use the Habitat development environment that we've given you, that workstation. You can continue to use. I will keep those up probably through the weekend. So if you're using them, you can continue to play around with them. But please, again, don't abuse them. Just use them for good, for learning Habitat. Join this Slack team. You've already done that. That's great. There is a really nice tutorial on habitat.sh. If you want to, so we've kind of looked at what does it take to run an application with Habitat. Well, in order to get to the place where you're running that application, you had to go through and package up that application. So over here on this Getting Started with Habitat, you'll see that there's lots of words, but then there's also 3 different versions of this, a Mac version, a Linux version, and a Windows version. And of course, each one of these is what is your development operating system. The workstations you're on, of course, are Linux, so you could directly on those go through this Linux environment. You will set up your environment, and the thing that you're going to do through this is actually create a plan and package up an application. You'll package up an application and then be able to run it, inject some configuration, and things like that. So you'll get a good opportunity to go back to the beginning of the life cycle, if you will. We sort of started at the end where you're running and managing services. but how did the service get to the place where we had a learn/MongoDB or a learn/national-parks? Of course, there are many packages on the depot that you can check out at app.habitat.sh. You can read blog posts. We have a number of blogs around Habitat. Habitat is a pretty active, it's under very active development, and we're writing lots of blog posts, sharing experiences, and so forth. We would love for you to share your experience. If you have your own blog or whatever, if you'd like to co-author a blog with us, if you write a blog, I'd love for you to share that with us so we can send you some special swag or something like that. Also, you can check out all of our open source work over on GitHub at habitat-sh. So that's pretty much it. What I'd love to do is, in the next 38 minutes or so, hang out with you, answer any questions that you have. If you want to walk through the tutorial or watch me walk through some of the tutorial, I'm happy to do so. And I hope to see you at ChefConf. So I'm just going to stop talking for now. And if you have questions, feel free to either unmute yourself and ask the questions here in the Zoom, or post your questions over in the Slack channel, and we'll be happy to answer those. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's really been my pleasure. I hope you've had a little bit of fun and got to learn something new about Habitat.
Morning, this is Mike.
Hey, Mike, how's it going? I see
Not so
that you
bad.
raised your hand in Zoom. That's not a feature that I have a whole lot of experience with, so that's a good protocol, I suppose. Raise your hand and then ask a question. Awesome.
Sure. So I'm looking through a couple of the packages that are available on the website, and I lied. The fourth one I checked had Windows in it. I was going to say, is there a way to check for Windows packages versus Linux packages? Because I was unsuccessful in my initial attempts.
So right now, I'll field that one for you, Nathan, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
So right now, like the depot, we're still working on the Windows support. It's mostly, I think, getting there as far as feature completeness on the depot side. But I don't know that we actually have a sane way currently to search one or the other. Ideally, what we're going to want to be able to do in the future is to have from your CLI, just to have Habitat. Like if you run your search, you can run those searches just like you would through the front end on the website from the CLI with Hab Package Search. And what we would like to do is just basically inherently detect what OS you're running on and give you the option to kind of also pass in an OS. But I don't think that that feature is in yet. So Yeah, and I will have to double check on that. Like a lot of the people, or specifically Matt Rock, is writing a lot of the Windows support stuff, and I don't think he's online yet today. I don't believe that we have like a really straightforward way currently of letting you search between Linux or Windows packages.
Sure, and just to plug Matt Rock stuff, his video tutorial for Windows Habitat from a couple weeks ago is fantastic.
Yep. Yeah. So, and I think he did a lot of that in his own like depot instance. So I don't think some of that stuff has been ported over to our prod environment yet. And Nathan, it looks like we have another question, request to walk through installing Habitat on a VM.
Yeah, I can certainly do that. So let's do that. Okay, so I'm going to cough, and then I will walk you through how do we install that. So the first thing that you need to know is where to get the packages that you want to download. So if you go to habitat.sh, you'll see that there's a download link here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the download link, and then it's going to ask you what operating system are you going to install on. So you can install Habitat itself on on Mac, on Linux, or on Windows. Now, if we're on a Linux VM, which is where we are today in our workstation, you can just install you can install Habitat and go. The only requirement there, as it's listed here, is that it's a 64-bit processor with a kernel greater than 2.6.32, which is basically a relatively modern Linux, and that depends on your definition of relative and your definition of modern. But it's probably safe for your development environment at least. Now, if you want to run Habitat on Mac or on Windows, you have to have Docker installed locally as well, because the Habitat commands, like the studio where you build your packages, will actually run within a Docker container. But I'm going to walk you through how to install and get this running on Linux. So first, you would download the package. And of course, I'm going to install, I'm just going to overwrite the installation that I have. So I'm just going to copy this link address, and then I'm going to go back to my VM, and I'm just going to curl -l, that URL that I was just given. And then I'm just going to write that out to a file, and I'm just going to call the file hab.tar.gz. So that's what's going to be written out. I'm just grabbing that package off of the website. So that's going to run, and when that's done, I'll have a new file locally here called hab.tar.gz. And I'm going to just paste into the Slack another command that you can run. Let's see. So this command that I'm typing in here, just there, that curl that points at a Google, like a short link Google, is exactly what I just did, minus plus or minus the name of the package the name of the file that I wrote into. So I wrote into hab.tar.gz. That command would write into hab-x86_64-linux.tar.gz. Right. So now that I have that tar.gz, first you can see that it's a relatively small thing. It's not like a giant thing. Obviously, it was very fast to download as well. I'm just going to tar xzbf. Just going to untar that thing. And that creates a directory that is the version of Habitat that I have, and then there's the hab command. And so right now, if I do which hab, you'll see that it's currently in user bin. So the next or final step that I would do is just to copy this file. So I would sudo copy that over to /user/bin, or wherever you want to put that thing, as long as it's in your path. That's like doing that isn't super interesting, because what I did is I just overwrote Habitat with the same Habitat that was there before. Since this was just installed last night, it's the latest version anyhow. But that's basically how you get Habitat installed. Now, if you look at the tutorial, sort of once you've installed Habitat, the next thing that happens is if you want to package an application, the next thing that you would do is run this command called hab setup. And I'll just run through that. I'll just run through that to show you what that does. So if I run hab, hab setup. It's easy to type and talk while you're watching me. So hab setup. This is going to set up my studio environment, which is where I go to build packages. So the first thing that it's going to ask me is, do I want to set up a default origin? So if you think about origins and how they work, origin is like your organization's namespace. And when you publish things up to the depot, they will live within your origin. Now, I can do this without having to hook up to the depot, or I can do it and get connected to the depot. So do I want to set up a default origin? I'm going to go ahead and say, yes, I do. I want to set up a default origin. The next thing that it will ask me is, what do you want your origin name to be? So the origin name, I don't know, it defaults to just the username on the system, which might be fine, might not. I'm just going to, because I'm not going to publish any packages from here, I'm just going to leave it with the default name of chef. It will then ask me, do I want to create an origin key for chef? Yes or no? I'm going to go ahead and say yes, which is, of course, the default. Yes, please create an origin key. Next, it's going to ask me if I want to set up a default GitHub access token. Now, I have to set up an access token if what I want to do is take the packages that I've built and publish those packages to the public depot. So I'm not going to I'll show you really quick. It just takes a second. So if you want to set that up, I'm not going to, but I'll show you the process for doing so. You simply log into GitHub. From your profile, you go over here to settings. And then from within the settings, you create a personal access token. And then you can generate a new token, or you can edit an existing one. I will generate a new token. It will make me confirm my password. So I'll do that. I won't tell you what that password was. And if you look back here in the instructions in hab setup, it tells you exactly what level of access it needs. So the depot uses GitHub authentication by personal access token with the user email and the read org scopes. So if you find down here, you'll see the user email and then org. So I have it read org. So these are the two things that I need to have. So it tells me user email and read org scopes. So I have read org and I have user email, and I will generate the token. And it will remind me that my description can't be blank. So I'll just do hab workshop. And then I will generate the token. And since we're going to publish this recording, now everyone can see what that token is. What I would want to do is copy that token. I would want to paste it in there. And now I have set up my GitHub access to, except I have to say yes first. Yes. Then I can paste in my GitHub access token. And now I'm going to immediately delete that access token because, yeah, I don't want you having my access token. And then the last thing that it asks you is, do you want to enable analytics? And this allows the hab command line tool to send anonymous analytics back to us so that we can get a better understanding of how Habitat is being used, improve the user experience, and so forth. I'm going to say yes. Okay, so now Habitat is fully set up for me. I can build packages now. I can run the supervisor. The setup portion that we just went through is only if you're going to be building packages. It's not required for running the supervisor. Else we would have had to do that during our labs earlier today. But that's basically the setup that you need. So I hope that answered the question. But let me know if you have more. And Michael, I see your hand raised, so go ahead, Mike, ask your question. You can unmute yourself.
Hey, so related to that, I imagine one thing that people are going to want to do is for their proprietary apps is not share those out necessarily. So is there an option for having an internal registry of some sort, or what is that like?
Right. Yeah, so a private depot, if you will, is one of the things that we're currently working on and is going to be shipping pretty soon, like within the next couple of months. So there are a couple of options that you have. Of course, the best option is that private depot, and we hear you loud and clear. Like, you're definitely going to be publishing stuff that you want only you and your organization to have access to. Private depots will be the way, and that is work that is currently under development. In the meantime, some of the things that you can do is you can actually just have a package. When you build a package, it creates what's called a HART file. It ends in .HART. That's a habitat artifact file. You could store those wherever you want, and you can actually just take a HART file and install it directly. So you could kind of manage a fake depot, but it's not like the best user experience today, but that is definitely coming.
Awesome, looking forward to it.
Yeah, great. Okay, so there was a question. Docker and Habitat do essentially the same thing. I would say that that actually Habitat complements Docker very well, but they don't actually work the same way. One of the nice things about Habitat is that we can take this package, like our Learn MongoDB or our Learn National Parks, and we can run it directly on a virtual machine, directly in or on bare metal, but we can also take that and export it as a Docker container. When you export a package as a Docker container, you get the supervisor within that Docker container, and then the service that you exported as well. And so now you get all of the benefits that you get with Habitat, things like service discovery, the ability to inject configuration, the ability to inspect the configuration of a running package, and so forth. You get all of that within your Docker container. And then you can then utilize, schedulers and other tools within the container ecosystem to run those Docker containers. So we actually view Habitat as a great complement to Docker. I think that it changes the build process a little bit. We have customers that were using Docker, are now using Habitat to build their own Docker containers and then managing them on Kubernetes or Mesosphere or what have you. Okay, so the question is, let's see, can you talk about how the supervisor does scaling? There's a couple of things there. So first, the supervisor doesn't inherently, the supervisor is not a scheduler, right? So when you think about scaling, one of the ways that I'm interpreting your question is, okay, so I have this application that I'm running and it's receiving a bunch of load, and we want to alleviate that load by launching more instances of that application, and therefore doing some automatic scaling out of your application. The supervisor itself has no capability for that. That's something where you might run containers in Kubernetes or something like that. You may use some other sort of external tool to manage adding additional services, adding additional instances of services into your cluster. Like an autoscale group in AWS, as Ian mentioned, could be something that Kubernetes does for you, or if you're running in containers, whatever the case may be. Now, when you have the way that the supervisors work, the more supervisors you have, the more resilient your applications are going to be, right? Because if I have 8 instances of that Java app that are connected to a replica set that is the MongoDB, that's going to work really well. And when I add another instance of that Java app, so I go from 8 to 9, the startup is exactly the same, and it just joins into those service groups. So I would start up a Java app. I would have it bind to the MongoDB service as a database. It would go into those service groups. The supervisors would communicate with one another and understand there's the MongoDB over there. We'd all connect to that, and so forth. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but you're, of course, welcome to either unmute yourself and ask with your voice or type in follow-up. And Mike, go ahead.
So what would a good sort of tenancy model for Habitat sort of look like? So would I run a single group of supervisors and give the different subgroups access to that, or would I give each subgroup their own group of supervisors?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it really depends on sort of the workload that you're putting into each application. So if I was running this national parks application in sort of a somewhat traditional way and at scale, I might have multiple cloud instances or maybe even multiple container instances that are running the Java application. And then I would have a separate, probably a separate virtual machine, or maybe even a separate bare metal machine for each one of my nodes in my MongoDB replica set. So the true sort of scale of that application might look like this. I might have 3 virtual machines, each one running a HAB supervisor with 1 instance of the MongoDB on it. So now I have 3 nodes, if you will, each running a MongoDB, all connected into one service group together. And then in front of that, I would probably run, the Java app is a little bit less, like it's not a stateful app per se. So you might have like a Kubernetes cluster or just a bunch of containers or little virtual machines that sit in front of there. And then each one of those containers would have its own supervisor, and they would all sort of join together into that group. Or if it's virtual machines or cloud instances, right, I'd have a supervisor running on each one of those cloud instances. So I may end up with 10, let's say 10 supervisors, each running 1 Java instance, 3 supervisors, each running 1 Mongo instance, all together in the same service ring, but then divided into service groups where you have your app service group and you have your database service group. And then probably in front of that, depending on where you are, you would want some sort of load balancer. So that might be something like an HA proxy that you might be running on a separate instance, or if you're in Amazon, it might be like an ELB that you're running that sits in front of that.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
I'll just keep asking questions if no.
Yeah, great.
Oh, somebody else is typing. I'll hold off their mic.
It's Habitat is so new. We love to get these questions, and frankly, we'd love to hear your feedback on sort of the experience using it. And I know, like, maybe you've had an hour and 3/4 of experience right now, but over time, like, we'd love to hear how things are going for you. And this Slack team is very, very active. All of the core developers all of the core developers for Habitat are in this Slack team. There's always discussions going on in general. In fact, we at Chef, where Habitat is, Chef Software Inc. is the company behind the open source project Habitat. But in our own internal Slack, we actually shut down all of our Habitat channels and have moved them all out into this public team, because we truly are trying to build this as a community effort and doing it all in the open. Okay, is there a Jenkins plugin for Habitat? Is there any use case we can use Habitat deployment through Jenkins? I would say there is not a Jenkins plugin that I know of yet, but I think it's a good thing for us to explore, both as a community and as a company behind Habitat, but then I also think that one of the things that we didn't talk about with our supervisor, let's see if I can pull up a page here on the website really quickly. Let's go over here to the docs. Let's look at, let's see, is it under running packages? Yeah, we have this thing with the supervisor called an update strategy. And the way that an update strategy works is like this. If we look at this command here, hab start your origin, your app, we give it an update strategy. So in this case, the strategy is rolling. And then we give it a URL. And that URL is a Habitat depot. So what this says, if I like translate this command into English and use many, many more words, is basically we tell the supervisor, start up this application, and I want you to watch the depot where you grabbed this application from, where you grabbed this service from. And if there is a new version of that application that becomes available in the depot, what I want you to do is follow this rolling update strategy. And the way that the rolling update strategy would work, let's say we're back to that scenario where we're running the National Parks app, and we have 10 different instances of the Java application. So I have 10 different supervisors, each one managing one instance of the Java service, the National Parks service. They're all running under a rolling update strategy, and they're watching after the depot. Someone publishes a new version of that Java app to the depot. What the supervisors will do is say, hey, all 10 of us, let's get together and let's have an election. And our election is going to be an update leader. So whoever gets elected the update leader, let's say that it's me, my job is going to be to go to that depot, hold down that new version of the application, and run it. As part of that package, there should be a health check. So the rest of the supervisors will watch me, and they'll ping me. They'll ask, hey, are you still healthy? Are you up? Are you still running? If I'm still up and running after the update, then the next one from our leader election will go. And we'll follow that one service at a time, or one supervisor at a time, until everyone in this ring or everyone in this service group has been updated. So that's one of the update strategies. The other update strategy that we ship with is what's called an at-once strategy. Now, the at-once strategy is a little bit less complex. As soon as there's a new version, we will all update to the latest version from the depot. So if you think about how that might work in terms of a pipeline, what you would want is your pipeline, of course, you're going to write your plan, you build your package, the artifact comes out of that. That artifact gets published to your depot. So it's that publishing, like the build process might happen within Jenkins, although we are working on what we're calling a build service that will automate a bunch of that for you as well. And then after being built, you would probably run some tests against that thing, validate that it's good, and then you would publish it to the depot. So the moment of publishing to the depot would make those new packages available. Now, there's another thing within the depot that we're working on called views within the depot. You can think of these kind of like channels, maybe in an artifact repository, where you might have a view that is the production view of your packages, and you might have a separate view that is the QA or the test view of your packages. And so the way that that would work is it gives you an opportunity to essentially publish to the test view, or publish a package, and this version belongs to the test view. While you test that out, once you're happy with it, you can then promote that test version into your production view. It's the same package, it just gets promoted to a different view, and then your supervisors will see that and download and update that thing. Wow, that was a really long question. I'm sorry, that was a really long answer for the question, is there a Jenkins plugin? I hope that gave you some good bit of insight, though, into what we're thinking and how Habitat works. Okay, Mike, great question. So the question is, let's say, what does a deployment with Habitat look like where the components are containers? So each one of the services that we're running is actually a container. Now, within that container, you would have your supervisor and the service or the services that that supervisor is running. And those containers are scheduled by something that's outside, like Kubernetes or Mesos or Docker Swarm or whatever. So then that's the scenario. The question is, would the scheduler be another service that the supervisor manages, or is it outside of the view? So the supervisor really doesn't care where it's running. So in the same way that the supervisor doesn't care that in our instance it's running on a cloud VM, it wouldn't care if it was running on bare metal, and it also wouldn't care if it was running in Kubernetes. So sort of that Kubernetes or that sort of scheduler is outside of the supervisor, and you have all of the capabilities that that scheduler gives you. So in the example of Docker Swarm, as an example, like I don't remember the exact command, but let's say you have 8 Java apps, and you want it to go to 10, you could run a Swarm command that's like Swarm add 2 to the Java app, and it would launch 2 more containers. Those supervisors, as they came up, would see the other supervisors and join into that service group. But that bringing them up, pulling them down, that would be managed outside of the supervisor by an external actor, and the external actor in that scenario might be Swarm, might be Kubernetes.
Thank you, that makes sense.
Okay, great. Yeah, these questions have been really, really great. I think we are going to wrap up here, though. So thank you again for joining us today. I am going to, as I mentioned at the top, this has been recorded. So later today, I'll publish an unedited version of this, just the whole live raw recording up to YouTube. We'll post the YouTube link into this Slack channel. And then we'll also have a follow-up email that goes out to each and every one of the folks that have registered for this workshop, so that you'll have an understanding of where to get the slides, where the videos can be viewed, and so forth. Thank you all again for joining us today. It's been really my pleasure and a lot of fun hanging out with you and walking you through some Habitat. I hope to see you in ChefConf, but in the meantime, please do stay active here in the Habitat channel. We love to hear your feedback. We'd love to hear how your experience with Habitat is going and what you're able to do with it. So thank you all very much, and I hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.